All right. Well, we could be waiting a long time for everyone to get here. In the meantime, I'm going to start with the usual farm panel introductions. We had a ton of good questions from registrants from just today alone. We actually Trav and I did some audibles throughout the day, kind of changing the presentation based on what the audience was asking. Now, we're not going to do that every time. We just had some really great questions, basically focused around the actual practices themselves, but also what are we talking about as far as cost savings. So, of course, any question, get it in there. Tonight's panel is likely going to go a little bit longer. We usually try and get the panelists done in 45 to 50 minutes, and then we do 20 minutes, or sorry, 40 to 45 minutes worth of questions. So tonight's probably going to be an hour of introductions, and this is just because we've got 4 different farms with very unique context to their area, but they've all of them have tried a number of different strategies. So just a wealth of information here as far as what worked, what hasn't worked, how have I tinkered, what am I excited for in the future, how are we going to make changes to adapt that. So I would be remiss if I didn't start with my own farm because I'm very passionate on the subject. And I think, so this is the Manitoba Agriculture Cost of Production Budget. So the guys that are on tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about cost per day feeding in these systems. And then, so thought it was probably important for people watching to know what a conventional or a average farm winter feed cost per day is. So this is from the Manitoba Agriculture Cost of Production Budgets. If you've heard me talk before, I reference these a lot because I think they do a really, really good job at understanding the real cost of production, not just in cows, but grain, you name it, any farm entity. So the cost we're going to go with, the assumption is a conventional system is $4.36 per day. And to a lot of you watching, I know one of our panelists said, isn't that a little bit high? I would challenge anyone to dive into these numbers and find me where their numbers are too high. I have some pushback with these budgets that some of the costs just aren't in line, like 150 cows. Cow-calf pairs, a $1,600 feedlot cleaning bill. So anyway, we can argue these numbers on both sides, but I think that's a pretty good, accurate representation of what we're talking about. There's also, if you guys check these out, just Google Manitoba Agriculture Cost of Production. There is reasoning behind and numbers and values behind every line item. So they didn't just make these numbers up. So with that being said, I'm just going to touch really quickly on some of the things that have made our winter grazing, I don't want to say successful because we're always trying to improve, but has definitely increased efficiency and lowered cost, that's for sure. Biggest number one thing that it just helps us sleep at night. It helps us understand when we want to buy hay, when we're moving cows, is having a good sound grazing plan. So basically knowing where your cows are going to be a year before the cows are actually there just helps you prepare where to set out feed, where the water is going to come from, what's there as far as residue. Are we going to need to feed grain when they're grazing said residue? And the first thing that we noticed when we had a good grazing plan and we increased the size of the herds in our pastures, we try and keep as many big herds as we can, preferably a cow herd and a heifer herd, is residue grazing. So having a good sound plan, leaving land to rest for an entire growing season or 2/3 of a growing season, and being able to hit that land first thing in spring or later in fall, when of course snow is not an issue. The shoulder season, so of course, know your bias. Mine is we really like to utilize standing cover crops in shoulder season. It's just whether that's after taking out a hayfield or after grazing or harvesting rye for forage, going back in with something warm season and really trying to leverage that wasted sunlight and turn that into cost savings from a winter feed cost standpoint. The one that I'm most passionate about, and I think where our system is just from an added value to land standpoint, from an ease on management standpoint, and from a livestock standpoint, bale grazing just makes so much sense for our operation. Something I tell producers is if you know your cost of production and hay is for sale for less than what it costs you to produce it on your own farm, it's like that is the fairest trade. You make that trade 7 days of the week, importing nutrients, putting them on your land at a more reasonable cost than you otherwise could have done it yourself. And we get spots that look like this. So my neighbors like to call this bale wasting. I was at Blue Set Campbell was at our presentation in Beaumont, our regional meeting in Beaumont in Alberta this past week. She calls this the what the cows eat is the investment in the cows. What they leave behind is the investment in the land. So this was a spot we bale grazed winter 23-24. And yes, there is some significant residue left behind there. I'll be honest, we didn't grow a whole lot as far as plant biomass this past year. But what we are going to do in the next 20, 30, 40 years is grow improved crops with reduced inputs, infiltrate water, because we've stimulated this system with everything, both the plant and biology need to thrive in the upcoming years. So we want to, it'll take a long time, depending on how many cows we settle in at, or if we do settle in on a number to get across our whole farm. Probably I won't live to bale graze across every acre, but what we're trying to do is import minerals, get that out on our productive land, and it utilizes us to be able to graze more cover crops in the summer, therefore further reducing our winter feed costs. So this is, I joke around with my old man that we picked the shittiest vehicle on the farm to be the most important one, but this is the most important vehicle on the farm. So we have good access to slew hay that we have with a few producers around. So we're able to buy anywhere between 18 and 2,000. Actually, this year it will be over 2,000 bales of slew hay every year at a pretty reasonable cost. Whoops. But what that means in a lot of cases, if the hay isn't up to snuff, this is what we start every day if need be. Currently, we're doing it every other day. So that $2.30, what that equates to in cost is 40 pounds of dry hay per cow per day at a value of 4.5 cents. That's delivered to the spot it's going to be eaten. Paying to have the twine removed. We had our local grad class come and remove twine, and then feeding a mixture of corn and split peas, 5 pounds every day. It actually works out to about 10 pounds every 2 days, but that's how we get our cost of $2.30 a day. We don't do manure removal. We try our damnedest to not start a tractor all winter long. But again, that comes with good planning, and that doesn't necessarily happen on our farm every single year. But as far as having 400 cows this year, I'm sure is the least amount we've started a tractor ever before. And that comes with a good grazing plan, a good winter grazing plan, and my favorite practice of all, which is bale grazing. So that is the end of my milk stool stand. I'm really looking forward to this group of producers. Little concerned we're going to go long because I've got some follow-up questions for these guys. And again, we had just a ton of good questions from registrants that registered either today or in the past. So the first one up is Rylan Crawford from Simpson, Saskatchewan. So Rylan, if you want to turn your video on and turn your mic on. Give us a little bit of an introduction where the farm is at for those of us that don't know where Simpson, Saskatchewan is. What's the farm like? Who's the stakeholders? And talk. Just give us a brief introduction. We're going to dive into some more detail about your alternative winter feeding systems.
Yeah, Rylan Crawford from Simpson, Saskatchewan. I started ranching about in 2013. It's just me on the ranch, I guess. Uh, just do cow calf for the most part, but also mostly like background as well, and then do a little bit of buy sell marketing and all that, and finish the odd time. Sell some heifers the odd time, just do stuff like that. But yeah, what started me down into this more year-round grazing was just did that kind of feeding hay to bigger Simmental, bigger Charolais cattle, shooting for as high a big of a calf crop as I could get. Just kind of started digging into the numbers a little bit and realized it wasn't hardly worth doing or whatever. And then yeah, I obviously need to cut down on my winter costs. So started reducing the number of days fed with a TMR mix. And like back then, I thought I had it pretty dialed in. I was feeding kochia, I was feeding chaff, whatever I could get from elevators, and thought I kind of had it made, feeding with old tractors. And it was still pretty high. Like it was probably up over $3 a day per head. And then yeah, started dabbling into winter grazing in 2018 with stockpiled grass. It's kind of like in our area there's some land that doesn't, like, it's grain land but has a bunch of grass grown in it in the sloughs and the hills that a guy can't farm. And so yeah, if you want to go to the next slide, I guess.
You betcha.
Yeah, so that's kind of an example on the left. You can see all the bushes, and that's kind of what they sit in. So important thing in that is that it is pushing the cattle a little bit. So shifted the cow weight more to an Angus base, and then breed them to basically glorified Charolais heifer bulls to kind of get that nice tan on them. But that's what the buyers seem to want. But an important thing in that is that the cows have to go into this grazing in good condition. So the calves get weaned at like 120 days. I guess for some more context, my calving this summer herd that it starts calving May 25th, and then run out on pastures for that, and then come back and pull the bulls at the same time because it works out to about 60 days. So keep the cows in good condition, keep the butter on the back, bring them in, start the calves in the feedlot, just basically onto straight silage and grain to keep their energy up. But then the cows, like I said, I just wean them right out in there, fence line graze them, just hawk square bales over the side to keep the calves happy. And then, yeah, the cows just stay out there grazing. So there's no wasted diesel hauling everything back home because it's probably 15 kilometers back to the feedlot from where they are grazing for the most part. So they just stay out grazing, which cuts down on diesel, cuts down on iron as much as the guy can, which is nice. And then go graze that. There's my barley supplementing rig.
So
Yeah,
what I guess sorry, you were probably getting to this, but what gauges when you start supplementing, and when you do decide to start supplementing, what are
yeah,
you supplementing with?
yeah. So I do stick to barley for the most part. Just it's readily available everywhere and grind it up, mix mineral in with it. But at -5 is when I start supplementing them, and that's take the average temperature of the whole day, not just it gets down to -5 at night. Like if it's minus 0 and -10, difference, that's when a guy starts. So start them at 3 pounds per bar of barley per head per day. And the point of that, I know I don't have to do that, but my reasoning in that is to keep the butter on the cattle, because the way our temperatures seem to work, like we'll get a week of bad weather and then a week of good weather. So if you get a week of bad weather, a week of -25 weather, that's when a guy has to quit and take them home and put them on some better feed. So if they have enough back fat on them, you can limp them through those cold weeks and get a lot more days out of it, because this is easily the cheapest grazing I can get. So that is an important thing. And as it gets colder, like I would add half a pound of barley for every -5 degrees that it gets on top of that. So like, just keep going down and keep adding half pound of barley per head per day. So it's really not a lot. And like I said,
So
mixing,
you get down to -30 and you're at like 6 pounds.
yeah, but I think they would come onto some better feed at that too. So
Yeah.
that's -30 for a few days is when a guy has to pull them. So if the forecast is looking at that. But yeah, if you see some cold weather starting to, like, a guy can definitely add the barley to it to kind of front load them a little bit to help them long through the storm a little better. And then I only do that every second day, because there is cows, like if you go out there every single day, there's going to be cows that just run out, grab their barley, and then go stand in a bush and don't get any fescue in them or anything like that. And that's for the most part the grass that they're grazing. So you want to keep them in that grazing mindset, keep them rolling on the grass, and just help them along with their energy requirements. But like I said, some more context is they are a smaller cow that they're they're only in their first, second trimester when they're doing this as well. So that their energy requirements are a lot lower than a big 1,600-pound cow that's going to calve out in February. Just for some context, but yeah,
So
just
what are you grazing here? Like, is this all stockpiled from summer pasture?
yeah.
Obviously, on the
So you
left
can
side,
on the
you're doing some
right bottom right, you can kind of see how it's cropland that just like a guy would farm 100 acres of that, and the rest is like what the cows are standing on is just hills that are too steep to farm, and that just grows that good prairie wool that does really well in the fall wintertime grazing, just the way it's kind of designed, naturally designed. So the cows go out and keep grazing on that, and then so you can kind of see the cows come up.
So
That
Ryland, is this all on your land, or are you making deals with
no, actually it's quite a bit of neighbors or guys that have got out of cattle or someone, stuff like that. So a guy can find it. Like it's kind of a little niche, I won't lie, too, because it's just there's not land like this everywhere.
Yeah.
But so that's what I kind of do there. So yeah, they go on that, like they were out until almost end of January 21st or something like that last year. But it is very weather dependent. Like I doubt I would ever graze year round. It's just I know that I'm gonna have to have a backup plan, like corn grazing, like bale grazing. Push comes to shove, a TMR mix, and the like I do silage, I do make feed, I do bale, all that too. But all that feed is like it's made to go into the backgrounding lot. So if I get down to plan C, plan D, then I would sell the calves early, and that's where they would go. If I didn't have enough corn grazing, if I, had an early winter or bale grazing or whatever too. But the picture on the right is how I know they're done with the paddock, how I know they're done with the field, because they get into that reed canary grass, and that's just glorified straw. Like there's hardly any
Hardly glorified.
yeah, it's terrible. So you can see cows go backwards on that pretty quick. So yeah, when they get down into that long stuff, that's when a guy knows to move them along. But yeah, that little barley supplementing rig, I'm pretty proud of. It just has almost like a little scoop and just drops almost like little shovelfuls all along, and the whole frame tilts, and it mineral mixes right up in it. So yeah, just load that up, like I said, every second day and just take it out. And
So you're just pulling that with the truck?
yep, just with the truck. So yeah, it's pretty simple. So it's a nice way to do it. I think there is in that herd this year, there's 550 head out grazing in that too. So it's an easy way to do it. Just keep everything in one herd, keep them rolling along. So
What are you doing for water on these rented acres?
yeah, just there is some good sloughs around out there. So I do go around with a little water testing kit and just kind of keep like if you guys doing it year to year, you kind of know which sloughs are good, but just making sure that the sulfates aren't too high in something, making sure they're not into a beaver slough or something like that, something that would cause abortions in the cattle. And then just chop and ice for the most part. The cows will kind of keep it open if you don't chop too big of a hole, but you don't want to stress the cattle out either and have too small of a hole. But yeah, just keep a right size holes too, just like a 2x1, so a cow can't fall down into it or nothing like that, which wouldn't be any good. But yeah, just keep them rolling on that. But yeah, it's the cheapest way I've found grazing for wintertime yet. And it's my favorite thing to do too. It's pretty simple. Like I'm out there, I'm doing that for an hour a day. I can go, like I said, I have a backgrounding lot. I have bales to haul. I have other things to do too. So it's cheap and quick way to feed a lot of cattle.
You might have things to do that don't include work too, that you
Yeah,
enjoy
I guess
in
that
life.
too, but lets me do a little more work too. So
Okay, so how many cows are we looking at in this picture on the left here?
there would probably be 550 there. And that's another thing too, is I do like you can get some pretty big fields to do this on, but I do like to keep them probably within a half mile of everything, just because the cows will get so spread out that they don't know that the barley supplement is coming.
Yeah.
Some will miss out on that, and you'll kind of see that in their condition a little bit as well. So
Yeah.
But yeah, just keep
Just
them
just just
rolling.
for just for context though, but even if you take the high end of your residue grazing at a buck 38
That's lower
and
than anything.
oh, by far. And
Yeah.
but let's say we take the $4.36 or 37 cents. That's $3 a day cost savings on 500 cows. That's
Yeah.
$1,500 a day
Yeah. Yeah,
cash in
exactly.
your pocket. Like that
And that,
is I mean, we're I gotta choose my words carefully here. We're probably at a risk of going backwards a little bit with current cattle commodity prices from a
mm,
management standpoint, because
yep.
there's so much margin there that we can invest in things like tractors and depreciation, fuel and stuff like that. But it's
Yep.
I think this is so important when margins come back down. It's like, how would you're feeding a cow for $1.38. Keegan's going to come on. He's our last presenter, and that's far cheaper than his
Yeah.
summer pasture.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing
Significant
too. Like
cost savings.
if a guy can do that and kind of sell it to the farmer as you're putting the nutrients out of the slough onto their cropland as well. And it just helps with that. And yeah, paying guys anywhere from like 50 cents to 75 cents per head per day. So they get a pretty good check out of this as well. So
Oh
it's
yeah.
it's a nice way to do it too. And like I said, it's actually starting to build genetics around it as well, buying stuff because they're on this for a third of the year. So it's worth extending as much as a guy can, even if, like I said, making an investment with these savings into genetics to keep doing this a little bit longer as well. So, but
Yeah, that's something that I didn't even think to cover, but that's such a good point about the epigenetics of doing this year
mhm.
on year, and your cows actually become better grazers.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's the thing too. Like, well, now we're into corn grazing, so this is kind of Plan B. So once the snowpack gets too high, like I said, or the weather gets too cold, I move them to some kind of taller grazing, I guess. So this is what I do with the corn grazing. So start them out to start the cows out on corn. I load them up with hay before they even touch the corn just to reduce a little bit of a risk with the acidosis, like give them the full, 60, 70 pounds just for a couple days. It doesn't need to be every day, but just until they kind of get started on it. But yeah, like if the cows are used to grazing, mine took right to it. They just went out into it and away they went. So let them out there into 3-day sized paddocks, which is a little bit of math to figure out. But once you kind of get a feel of it, it's not too hard to get all that going. But so they kind of get into the cobs the first day, get a little more condition on them, beef up a little bit, and then the next day they're kind of into leaves, smaller cobs, everything like that. Then by the last day, there's just stalks left. If you can kind of see in the bottom left corner, and then that's when I'll go out and give them 30 pounds of decent quality alfalfa because you want to keep the protein up a little bit on these just because the corn doesn't have enough protein in them as well. And they're a little bit closer to calving too. They're probably in the second, had them into the third trimester doing this too. So you do want to keep their guts good, keep that buffer a little good too. So giving them, like I said, 30 pounds of alfalfa every third day once they're on the stalks. And then do it a little bit later in the day. So that way they're not going to grain overload either on the next day too. But the fencing is important too. By this stage, there's not much moisture left in the ground either. So having a hard time getting a good zap in them. So I did switch or I guess didn't switch, but just always do this double line setup. And so that's a 7/8 post there, which is probably a little overkill on it, but it's not into the ground very much. Dare clip and just a aircraft cable to keep them out. So the bottom's ground and then the top's hot. And I just use a S400 Gallagher solar system, I guess for the most part. I know a lot of guys say that you can't, but just go out and check it every day, keep the snow off it. My cows are also very used to electric fence too, so they didn't really bother it a whole bunch. There's always going to be breakouts and whatnot too, but do that on all the permanent lines and then just single lines in between the smaller paddocks that get rolled up every third day as well. Uh,
Yeah.
on the far right, you can see that 7L reel with the aircraft cable on it. Those are my favorite reels just because the Gallagher reels or whatever speed rate, whatever you want to use. the plastic does seem to break quite often on them. So just the more metal a guy can get, the bigger
Yeah.
cable, it's a better way to go. So, but
I get just I saw we had another question, and again, I told you guys this wasn't going to turn into a winter water webinar, but
mm,
are you corn grazing on the same acres every year? And I guess just touch on when they're in the corn, what you're doing for water.
yeah, I guess yeah, they're right around my yard at this point. So they are it's just into a water bowl. I should have mentioned too, I do switch up the mineral to a 3-to-1 mineral. And just that's just free choice because you can't really force it into them with grain. But yeah, just keep them, kind of monitor that a little bit, make sure they're getting, enough mineral into them is important. But yeah, and just for that, I do switch. So I would go corn, and then I would switch to more of a legume heavy swath grazing the next year.
Yeah.
Just keep that crop rotation a little in balance. I know some guys do go corn on corn on corn. A little bit worried about different insects getting into the land that way. Crop disease depleting the soil a little bit. But yeah, it is definitely a good way to do it. Dr. Lardner has a good study on that of what it leaves for nitrogen and phosphorus too. If you want to, I can't recall the numbers exactly, but there's quite a bit of leftover nitrogen and phosphorus that it adds to the soil after you're done corn grazing. So it is a nice way to do it. But I included that slide on the far right. I did probably graze too far into the spring, and you can see right where the quad's sitting, it's pugging the soil a little bit. So that is something that a guy wants to avoid, but it's kind of up to the rancher on that if he does that or not.
So what
But
do you do between this time in corn grazing in the spring, up until when you're kicking cows back out?
I actually just kept them right on corn grazing and just kept them. They were, like I said, calving in the start summer calving out on pasture May 25th. So they were up until May 15th, just corn grazing and just doing that. And just, yeah, just from there out. And it was fairly simple. Did load them up a little more on grass right before they went out, just to kind of switch over the rumen a little bit. But it was, yeah, it's a simple way to do it. And like I said, I'm out there since it was right around my yard. It was, some days guy doesn't even go out and check on him from the road kind of thing. So it's a nice way to do it. It saves me a ton of time and ton of labor, it's good for the soil. It's just cheaper way to do it too. So, but
Yeah.
like I said, some guys too, like hear some guys say, well, maybe they don't need that alfalfa I do like to do it, but that definitely does add cost. Like last year alone, it was probably over $50,000 just for the alfalfa on that too. But another thing with that too, it does stretch out. You do get more cow days obviously out of it too, but
Yeah.
it's yeah. So, but
Well, I think what I like about but you don't hear a lot of people that are supplementing on day 3. But it's like you're asking a lot from that cow day 1. The amount of corn
mm,
he's ingesting on day 1 of a fresh move is substantial, and her
yeah,
rumen to adjust essentially to not uh uh over break that, or what's the right word? Insulin. There's too much sugar in the bloodstream.
yeah,
Like she's like trying to slow down her digestive system. Then
yeah,
to day 3, and a cow's got to consume high lignin corn stalks. How much value is she actually getting out of that biomass? Because it takes
yeah,
time for that digestive system to transition into actually being able to utilize that. So I mean,
yeah, and
so
like
interesting.
yeah, exactly. And the cows get yo-yoing too in their condition too. So it's nice just to keep that steady, just build on it, just keep them rolling. And it's yeah, they put on condition, and it's a nice way to do it. So
Cool. Awesome job, Ryland. Stick around for question time. Thanks for your little presentation, and looking forward to
yep,
you coming back on. So Kevin Booth from Milo, Saskatchewan. Kevin is I initially met him. He was coming on as a covers and code dealer. Now, as with a lot of people I meet, he's become a good friend, and we chat different ideas and cost of production. In fact, I think when we went out for supper last week, Kevin, we probably covered this topic about 80% of the time. So this isn't necessarily brand new information for me, but looking forward. Tell us a little bit about your farm, who you're farming with, and then we'll dive into your swath grazing you did this year.
Okay, first of all, you introduced me from Milo, Saskatchewan. It's Milo, Alberta.
Oh, Saskatchewan. Jeez. That's terrible.
No, terrible. No. Uh, I guess we're located in Milo in southern Alberta, so right between Calgary and Lethbridge, right in the middle there. Uh, we run a 400 cow calf operation. I ranch with my wife, two sons, and one of my daughters. I have another daughter too that helps out. She's our vet, so she's not there all the time, but a big help. We're a first generation ranch. We graze mostly native grass from June 1st to November. A lot like what Ryland said too. We do a lot of that residue grazing or whatever you want to call it. We're lucky we have some neighbors we're able to run on much the same of farmland residue and just that. I guess it's wasteland to a farmer, but it's candy to a cowman. So
Yeah.
we push that usually to the end of January, first part of February. We'll do the same thing. We will supplement if it gets real cold, but we do push pretty hard on that, and been pretty lucky getting away with not having to supplement that much. We are a
Well,
little nicer
and
out here too.
Kevin, maybe talk a little bit about, I mean, everyone should set goals as far, and I think for a cattle producer, winter feed being your biggest cost, it's good to set goals and have targets. Just like I know your context is different than us here in southern Manitoba under 3 feet of snow, but what you're trying to achieve out of your winter grazing system as far as days the cows are grazing versus what you're feeding.
Our goal is to graze cows 300 days a year without using equipment. Only feed with equipment for about 60 days to 70 days, basically right when we start calving. We don't always get that. Obviously, weather plays a part, and availability of like we're swath grazing, but not every year do we have the opportunity to do that. So every year is not, but that's our goal. And we've been hitting it pretty close the last 4 years, I would say, since we've expanded and had more access to more land to rent. We've probably had hot wire on half the acres in the Milo community at one time or another over the last 20 years grazing crop residues. So
Those grain farmers won't just let you keep the fence up to do it again next year, eh?
no, and most of the fences that are there are so poor, it's quicker to go out there with a hot wire and
Just
zip,
make
zip
your own.
around.
Well, let's talk a little bit about what you did this year. So for the people that are on, we got a ton of questions about swath grazing, and it was actually Ryland that mentioned he was doing a bit of swath grazing unsuccessfully, and that's what we try and do here is get honest feedback from producers that have tried it. So there were lots of people, this is a Covers and Co bias, asking about sorghum Sudan and swath grazing. If we want to bring it up in question period, I have a bit of information to share on that. Of course, we've done it on our own farm, but this is specific to your context, Kevin. Maybe just talk a little bit about what's going on here and kind of what the plan is.
Okay, well, we had a quarter section. We seeded full season. Um, the plan was to silage that, and that's what we did. So we grew it. It's under irrigation. We silaged it. We were halfway through cutting it when a hailstorm hit. So anyway, all that did was didn't get quite the first crop off, which didn't affect what we're going to talk about. But so our plan was to silage it and and then rewater it as soon as we were done silaging it and swath graze the regrowth. And that's what you're looking at here is the regrowth from the second crop. We did not fertilize or do anything other than water for the second time around. We only put about 35 pounds of N down initially with the full season anyway, but we didn't know there was, no costs as far as reseeding other than our irrigation costs and our time to fence.
So what time of the year, I guess, were you doing the initial cutting? And then what time of the year are we at here? And what was the plan from a grazing standpoint, Kevin?
We cut this in the first part. I think it was August 3rd is when the first cut was taken when we silaged. So it was about 4 days after when we were done silaging or cutting for silage. We just started to water. This was cut September 27th. So from August 4th, it had chance to start regrowing after that. And August or September 27th is when this was swath for our second crop. And we would have left it longer, but it was a killing frost threatening. So we would have left it 2 years ago. We left some till the 16th of October before we had a
Yeah.
killing frost.
So how big, just to appease the people that are on here for swath grazing, I guess, what's your history with swath grazing, Kevin? How big of a swather are you working with here, and what kind of animals are you hitting this with?
This is a 35-foot MacDon. My son's bought this year, and that's what we swath with this year. We've been swath grazing for about 20 years. Not every year. It kind of depends. We got a bigger land base now, which opens the opportunity up. We did it years ago on just 40 acres, and we didn't have as many cows. Um, that's when we first started. This is probably our biggest year and most successful time wise. So this was swath with a 35-foot swather. Um, like the crop looks great, and it was, and the swaths are bushy. They do shrink down over time because obviously there's a lot of moisture in that.
Mhm.
So we limited our cows. There again, it's a bit of a guessing game until you get a feel how far this goes. The weather was great, even though it was cold in winter. Not bad though. Um, we probably went 4 to 5 day moves on this, is what we did, just because the swaths were smaller. The feed quality was really good because it was fine, it wasn't coarse. So we could leave them on bigger paddocks, and we only split them into 20-acre paddocks, and we had 316 cows on that.
Yep.
So we only moved every 4 to 5 days, which if it was coarser and a bigger swath, we would have moved them quicker.
So
Or more.
I jumped ahead on you here, Kevin, to the actual grazing side of it. So when did you kick the cows out? And I'm assuming this picture on the right, you're showing just the difference in cleanup. Like it looks like those cows have actually utilized some of that stubble that's there as well.
Yes. So the cows went in December 27th, and they were out January 30th. So they had a total of 35 days. So on the right screen, I'm just basically showing they'll graze it right down. Well, not to the dirt, but really low. That is more. And I guess here's a sale for the full season. I've swath grazed triticale. I've swath grazed straight oats and peas. They've grazed the stubble in between the swaths and grazed it down like you see on the right, more with this blend than I've had in the past.
Mhm. Well, and that probably speaks a little bit too, like this is regrowth, right? Like
Correct.
the initial harvest has come off, and it's like this is the gravy at the end.
Yep. Yeah, it's there's a lot of green in below. You can't see it in these pictures, but the turnip tops and stuff grew, and there's Italian ryegrass that's still green in below there. So it entices them to graze through it, not just crop stubble like say oat stubble would be.
So what if anything, are you using as far as supplementation? And I guess probably a question people are wondering too, just if I can get everyone to talk about this, is what you're doing for water at the time.
This stuff was a mile down the road, so I was hauling water with an old 3-ton. It was 1 mile, and where they're at now, it's at the yard, so the water isn't an issue.
Yeah.
It's funny though. Some days at 316 cows, they drink 1,000 gallons, and some days they drink 3,000. And there wasn't much snow, but they were getting enough moisture grazing through the swaths. They were obviously satisfied because the water was there the whole time.
Yep. So
Um,
I know we're going to talk a little bit about as far as economics, Kevin, but a question lots and lots of people have with swath grazing, and I know that your context is a little bit different, that you don't have a whole bunch of snow to deal with, but how are you making that decision on when to move them, how much to force them to clean up before they're moving on to the next paddock?
it's kind of like when Rylan was talking about grazing corn. The first day, or you talked about, they overeat the first day. Like they got you know, full plate in front of them. If you're on a 3 or 4 day move, the first day or two they overeat. If the weather's good, I'll push them to basically clean it right up. Along, obviously their conditions you got to be watched, but it's a lot easier to push a cow when it's +5 in the day than it is when it's -25 like it is now.
Yep.
If it gets cold, we'll go out and just supplement some bales of hay, just to supplement them, just so they do clean it up. Because if you don't clean it up, then you got to deal with a mess in the spring, and it's easier to supplement them with just a bale or whatever your feeding method is. Not everybody's it's pellets or what have you, but just so you can push them at it a little bit, make them do the work to clean it up.
So what percentage of the paddocks would you give them some supplementation as like a barometer before you move them? Or are you doing that at the last few days of every move?
I'll be honest, that quarter that we showed the pictures of and the one that we're grazing here, we didn't supplement at all. Like, we're moved to new swaths now. They're bigger, they're heavier. We have our heifers calving with our main cows. There's 55 heifers in with that. They're grazing good because they're with the cows, and the cows are opening everything up. We probably won't supplement these cows unless, yeah, I doubt we will. We very rarely do we supplement.
Yeah. So I think Ryland touched a little bit on this as well, Kevin, but you're an expert with this tool we're looking at here. Talk about maybe the specifics of why the airplane cable and the reel too. And I think people are probably most curious about what you got attached to the reel there.
Well, it's the same brand as what Ryland had. They're from Manitoba, I believe. We've had them for over 20 years. They're what I consider the best. Like you say, they're steel. They stand up. We've got quite a few of them, and they've been all over our place. That steel braided cable is great because if a deer or something does run through it, or if a cow goes through it and never broke it, like maybe untrained cattle, ours are trained, so they don't bother. But if they ever do break, we've had deer go through them the odd time. You just tie it together, just tie it in a knot.
Yeah.
Fixed.
Yeah.
The nice part of this thing on the right is that's a 12-volt ice auger for ice fishing. It hooks on the end. You hook it to a battery on the quad or whatever, the truck, whatever you're out there with. You can roll a mile of that wire up in minutes, and it's quick and it's easy.
So what does unrolling look like?
It's me on the side-by-side driving, my daughter sitting on the back of the side-by-side with the end of the cable in hand, and we drive as straight line as we can. That way, if the odd time when you're doing it, if whoever rolled it up didn't do it properly, sometimes the wires will catch and grab. That way, it's not jerking out of your hand. But we can do it in minutes. We fence a lot of country with those, and yeah, they're slick. I've never found anything better for our operation.
What are you using for posts?
3/4 inch sucker rod, like sucker rod from oil wells. We cut them in 36-inch lengths. Pound them down. We got a plastic insulator that goes on that's got about 3 different size options. We've had really good luck. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but some of those insulators are 20 years old. They're good and they work very well.
Unless you got something to add, Kevin, let's talk. Okay, so this is, we did touch a little bit about in this. Sorry, I put the cart before the horse, but this is a little bit of the geography you're dealing with. So maybe let's give a, like that or a picture on the right, of course, on the right-hand side of the right-hand picture. How many days would they be at? Like you're coming out to look at those cows that are grazing that. Like, what are you seeing? How many days they got left? What are you looking for?
The cows on the right, on the far right, that was ones we just turned into that day. They just hit that. They came off the swaths on the left, on the other side of that fence.
Oh yeah.
The swaths were a little heavier. You can see some residue. Most of that is manure that you're seeing in there. There is,
Right.
there's not a lot of residue that's
Yeah.
uneaten.
Yeah.
And then of course they lay in that too when it's, especially the first few days when there's lots there, they like to lay in it. So especially when it's cold, but if you force them to clean it up, they'll eat it up. Cause I mean, you can roll a bale of hay out for a cow and she'll lay and piss on it too. So it's really no
Big
different.
time.
Then on the left, that was a field we with our second growth down where we irrigate by the lake. Same thing. It melted off. So even though we got done grazing that, we had a few days of grazing after we took the wires down and just overall grazing the whole quarter because we'd had some melting and just that in between swaths because you can't see much for swaths that are there. I think that was just a cleanup day to kind of clean up before we moved them out of there.
Kevin, are you back fencing at all, or just staying ahead of the cows and they can cross back what they've grazed?
Just they go back across what they graze typically for water all the time.
Yep. Yep. You betcha. Whoops. So, this was a bit of a partnership or a trio coming up with this number for you. So if you guys are interested, this field is actually Dakota, our Saskatchewan territory rep, who's also doing basically he's taken on our research division of Covers and Co. He's doing an excellent job. So Kevin, this field is actually in a cover crop economic trial. Dakota's been doing 6 right across the prairies. Kevin happens to be one of them. So if you're interested, you can take a look. But this is where we got came up with this number you're looking at here of $1.64 a day. So Kevin had an initial crop, as he had mentioned. So Dakota and I did some figuring as far as where to put costs in, and where to put costs towards the fall grazing side, where to put costs towards the winter forage side. But I think we were pretty generous as far as the cost to your fall grazing, and I mean this is where it spit it out. I'm curious, I guess, your thoughts on the cost, Kevin, and as far as like what you see cost savings wise from when you're firing up the TMR.
Well, we like to say, whether you feed with a tractor, TMR, or whatever you feed with, I just hate starting a diesel engine to feed a cow. And this at $1.64, and that, like I said, is probably generous. We added some more. We did water with irrigation for that second crop, but not near as much because we did have a wetter year than say we have the last few.
Kevin, just let me interrupt you there, just for
Yep.
context for people that have had nothing to do with irrigation. What would this crop had for water, just the regrowth section?
Well, we had a 3.5-inch rain with the hail, so it started off for our country great.
Yeah.
We probably put on about 3 to 4 more inches in total, and so we had some costs, to do with the irrigation. We also charged ourselves some, our labor to put up the hot wire, and $18 an acre to swath
Yep.
is what we charged that out at. But other than that, like they say, there was no fertilizer, there was no reseeding.
Yeah.
This is the cheapest swath grazing I've ever had because, say, it wasn't the initial crop, and it was kind of, there's not a charge on the land because we wouldn't have had, if that was just a single cash crop, we wouldn't have had, that land would have been doing nothing. This way we had it, we had roots growing in it till September 27th, and it kept growing after, because a lot of those species don't die with a light frost. So it was green until end of October.
So Kevin, I'm looking at the snow and lack of snow that's there. I'm curious, what do you think would have happened if you didn't swath it at all? Or is that just something that it's like, it's safe in a swathy, so if we get 6 inches or 8 inches of snow, you're not going to lose that biomass you grew?
If I knew we weren't going to get snow, it's there again. We had about a foot of snow. For us, it was a pretty good snow, not like what you guys are used to. Problem we get is with the Chinooks we get, you'll have a foot of snow, and a week later you get a Chinook, and then it melts and it freezes, and they get the ice, and the ice gives me more trouble than the actual deep snow.
Yeah.
I have a neighbor who usually he underseeds with some Italian ryegrass, and he doesn't swath it, but I just was a peace of mind when it was in a swath, knowing it didn't matter what came at us. It was just kind of like money in the bank for us.
For sure. Cool. Well, great job, Kevin. Stick around for question period. Thanks a lot for coming on. Thomas, we'll keep working on the video, but if you're okay just going like this, let's do it.
Oh, yeah.
Thomas Hagan from Virden. Are you actually from Virden, or is there a small town shout out I can give Thomas?
No, yeah, we're from Virden, yeah, just south of Virden.
Cool. As a small town guy myself, I don't like being told I'm from Pilot Mound. So Thomas, give us a little bit of context on your guys' operation, who you're farming with, kind of how did you, we're going to talk with you specifically about silage pile grazing. So just give us some context of what the farm looks like and how you eventually got there.
Yeah, so my dad always raised cows, and so we started buying land, I think, in about 2011. And funny enough, the first piece of land we ever bought ended up being part of the piece we ended up on in 2016. So we moved about 3 times, and in 2016 we got the place that we're at. We got it bought, and we put it together in 3 different pieces, and it all actually touches. So it was pretty unique. And yeah, we moved the house in, and then we actually ended up selling that place, and now we've just moved into a new yard that we built on the ranch, and we've been here since May here. So yeah, and we've run a cow calf operation predominantly, and we've kind of changed lanes a little bit. We've been selling off cows, mainly pairs, and we're getting into feeders more or stockers. But we still have a cow herd, and we probably always will have some cows. Um, so yeah, we utilize the corn grazing with the cow herd, not with the feeders that are in pens. So that's kind of the background. We pretty much the same as everybody else on here with our grazing. We rotate the ranch is split into 50 paddocks. We use natural water on everything. We've utilized a lot of stockpiled grazing, a lot of bale grazing, and yeah, for 3 years now we've done the corn grazing.
Whoops. Well, let's get into it. So I apologize. Some of these pictures I know were Connor's and not yours. So just tell me where you want me, but give us some context of, for somebody that's never heard this idea at all, what's going on here?
So I guess first of all, I got the idea 4 years ago. There's a fellow by Lenore, Manitoba, Pat Waller. He'd been doing it for years. He'd had several tours. I never went to one of them. I always should have. Always said I was going to. And somebody, I can't remember who, told me how great it worked. And so I called Pat, and he sold me on the idea. And then I actually had Ben Stewart from Yorkton. He's wrote a couple articles in the Cattleman about it. He helped me a lot too. So both of those guys told me how to fence it, how big to build it, how wide, how high, and just how the whole thing would work. So 3 years ago, we bought corn silage and we tried it with dry cows. We had weaned our calves, and so this picture that we have on the left is actually I'm grazing it with pairs. So what you see, the picture on the left is you see the face that the cows see. There's a fence on each side. It's about 20 feet away, just on the outside of those round bales. It's a 2-strand high tensile fence that runs off a 110 fencer. And then we run a Gallagher reel across the front. And there's 2 posts stuck in the silage. You'll see them on the pictures coming up. And they're the bale grazing posts. They're about 6-7 feet long, fiberglass with the steel pigtails on the end. So you just shove the posts into the pile. And I mean, this system is not complicated. You literally walk out in the morning and you push the posts in about, it depends on, you have to do the math on it, but it's about 8 inches a day. Kind of come to know after 3 years, it's not quite as much of a science. It's just as long as you measure your pile, know what's in it, and you use markers. So, I have my pile split into 8 lengths, and I just got to hit a certain spot by a certain date. And I can speed them up or slow them down as I like. So the picture on the left.
Sorry.
Well, no, that's fine. The next picture shows it too. But so the picture on the right, if you go back one,
Yep,
is the back end of the pile. So that's where the cows obviously don't eat. The whole pile is surrounded in round bales, just so the cows can never get onto it. Because if the cows ever get onto it, they just, smash the whole thing and bust all your plastic up, and it's a wreck. So the picture on the left, you can see the bales I have over top. That's not necessary if you graze it with dry cows, but that's something we discovered with calves. The calves are not, they don't seem to get a shock somehow. I don't know how that works, but they'll literally scratch their back on the wire. So without some sort of physical barrier, they can kind of get in up around the side of the pile and they'll mess it up. So if you just do this, they can't get anywhere. So they can only see the face of it. So right. I got to go out there about once every week, once every 10 days and move those bales. So basically I got to take 2 bales back to the yard and the other bales just keep pushing back, right?
Yep.
That's just straw around there. I've actually last year used hay around there and they just ate the bales as they went along. I loved that because the pile was, other than the plastic, was darn near edible.
Yep.
It just didn't work out. I had a lot of hay and bale grazing, and then we got a bunch of feeder calves in the pens, and I needed hay around there for them. So I used this straw. Now with dry cows, which if somebody's going to try this silage pile grazing, I would strongly suggest they start it with dry cows because it's super easy. You don't need those bales. They just respect the wire, and then if they ever knock the wire down, they don't really tend to crawl up the side of the pile. They can't really physically get up, if you know what I mean. So if you move to the next slide.
So I think maybe a good idea, Thomas, would be to talk about, I guess this looks different than any corn silage pile. What are you after as far as height, width? And do you notice anything as far as like increased spoilage or something because it's of the shape?
Well, that's a great question. So the pile is 8 feet high, and it's what the measurements are 80 feet wide for 200 dry cows. So my cow herd now has dwindled to 125 cows. When I first started this, I had 230 cows on the pile. And there was actually like about 50 bred heifers, and it was only actually 80 feet wide, and it worked great as well. The cows were a little smaller,
Yeah.
and they didn't. I was blown away at how the heifers looked. They looked great. They didn't seem to suffer. They didn't have to compete. So, anyways, the measurements are 80 feet wide for 200 cows. 40 feet wide, obviously, for 100 cows. 8 foot tall. Some people like them 4 feet tall. I just personally think there's enough spoilage on the top that I like to have the least amount of surface area. But I wouldn't go higher than 8, 9, 10. It starts to get high enough that you have to knock the silage down.
Yeah.
These cows can eat that whole thing.
So those cows are both obviously eating underneath the wire, but
Yeah.
will they be also reaching up and knocking that top layer down?
Yeah, they do. They do. If I guess you kind of got to look at it as it's interesting. It's kind of like I supplement cows a lot with salt and grain, and it's the same way. It's like a salt block. There's cows at this thing 24/7. There's never a rush, and they just get it sorted out. As long as you have enough space, it's never open. There's always a cow there,
Yeah.
and so you can go out there sometimes and there's only 5 cows. Like they have lots of time to eat. You know what I mean?
Yep.
The biggest thing is you cannot limit the amount of silage you feed them to less than about 65 pounds a cow. Like if you just said to yourself, I'm going to move the wire 6 inches today, and these cows are going to eat 60 pounds. Well, some of the cows are going to eat, or let's say if you said you're going to limit it to 50, some of the cows are going to eat their 60, 65 pounds, and the next cow is going to get 30. So
Yeah.
you can't limit it below that line.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. The big cow's get a big cow and the small cow is going to get whatever's left.
Yeah, so you really have to, on a pair, the pairs will eat 85 pounds a day, and as a dry cow, they'll eat 60 to 65, and that's with corn silage. I do know that with alfalfa silage, I've never done it. It's a lot harder to do because the alfalfa packs so hard. This corn, you know what corn silage is like. You can reach in there and grab it with your hand. Like the cows just stick their tongue out, and they get, it's no problem. So if you want to go to the next slide, I think I'll show you what's going on there. So this is a great look at what dry cows will do. So as you can see, like you'll be kind of blown away, people that do it, how little waste there is. There's probably more waste if you feed it in a wagon. Like they literally lick the ground where the silage is. So this is the first year I did it. This is 230 cows, and they're dry. We'd wean the calves and they're in the pen. And I could explain it later, but I'm going to go back to that. I like this system better with dry cows. But yeah, there is basically no waste. If you look at the middle picture and the one to the right, you can kind of see a ledge developing at the top.
Yep.
What happens there is that's the frozen layer on top. Obviously, the colder it is, you'll get more of it. I actually go along with an axe, the butt end of the axe, and just knock that down. You can go out with the tractor. I know lots of guys that do this they prefer to do it that way, but I mean, I'm kind of the same as a lot of guys on here. I'm trying to start a tractor, like not at all. So right now with this system, with the dry cows, you could get away with, because you don't have to have the straw bales around them, and you can use an axe. Like you could not fire up a tractor for 2 weeks, and even when you did, it would just be for a little minor cleanup. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you betcha. So I'm just looking at this and I'm like, if one of that top lip falls down and actually lands on the fence, so your wire's down in a spot.
Yep.
There's not a whole lot that can happen there other than the cows will fill up.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So you try to keep that to where there isn't a huge block that can fall over. And B, if it does, especially on the dry cows, and this is the difference, when there's no calves in there, that wire will be snapping on the ground. And those cows are so scared of it. It's basically anybody who's used to moving cows a lot in the summer, and you have them in small paddocks, they get to where they're so scared of the fence they won't go anywhere near it. This is what that's like in the winter. it's a lot, like I bale graze too to complement this. Like they get their hay to go with this mix in a bale grazing scenario. I bale graze for probably 15 years. Once they figure out the wire isn't working on the bale grazing, you know, you always get those 2, 3, 4 cows that'll jump it. In this system, you don't, because I mean, if you walk out there and when they first start on it, they get pushed into it. I mean, cows bellering like it's this one this year. I had I think it was 8 kilovolts running through there. Like I had 100 joule fencer on there, and the fencer's only about 200 yards away there, and I limited the amount of fence that it was on, so it was really hot.
Well, and like that should be good moisture in that soil and thawed ground.
That's the difference. Is like
Yeah.
we all know, winter moving a wire in the winter, it's a struggle. You got to train them. With this system, what's unique about it is we haven't bred heifers for 2 years now, and I try to buy a lot of cows, like, or not a lot, I should say 40 to 80 a winter, and I'll calve them out and keep some and sell pairs. You can dump cows on here that have never been on a wire and they respect this. Whereas
Yeah.
that's where I struggled in the bale grazing when I started bringing in outside cows as opposed to just strictly raising my own bred heifers. When I put them on that wire, they pretty much generally ruined the whole system for everybody.
Yeah.
Anyways, so I guess, what I should say, and I kind of touched on it, is the bale grazing is right beside this. So my day, this is actually Connor's picture.
Yeah, that's Connor's. Well, sorry, I'll back up. Let's.
It doesn't matter. You can go to either picture. I didn't take a picture of my bale grazing simply because I knew there was another bale grazer on here.
Yep.
My bale grazing is right beside there, so my day looks like I go out and I push the wire in, and then I move the bale grazing wire about once every 10 to 15 days. And what I love about the two systems together is just what I said. They really respect the wire on the bale grazing because they're used to it from the silage grazing. They're so scared of it.
Yep.
I've had like zero trouble. Like they're scared of it, you know? So
What are you doing? Like, is your ideal intake? Well, and you could also use the bale grazing almost as a barometer if you didn't get the posts in far enough or they're too far out, right? If they're over consuming the corn or under consuming, that's going to show up in the bale grazing.
it is. And you know, when I first started this, I thought I had it really down to a science. And I mean, I literally had a measuring stick that I went out there and moved the wire accordingly. Now it's a lot more leisure. I just go out and push it in, and I know about how far I have to push it. A lot like, you know, we're talking about swath grazing, and you get a feel for it. They don't, for me now, it's like as long as I hit my markers, like, you know, every month I'm supposed to be to a certain point in the pile. And I just got it kind of figured out now that I know how it's going. I literally just hit the halfway point and I was bang on. Halfway through the pile, and I'm supposed to get 120 days out of it, and I'm 60 days on it. So it's, you know, I feel pretty good about it.
What are you feeding in the bale grazing to supplement this?
It's just straight hay. Now that we have the pairs that we're leaving the calves on the cow, it's got to be a little higher quality hay, obviously, to complement this corn. We try to have a little higher protein hay because this corn, actually the corn in the original picture came out at 9% protein corn, which probably is a little bit high. Like you hear some guys getting a lot lower than that. We were trying to keep those pairs at around 10, 11% protein. Now I'm kind of thinking more 12 after, you know, some recent stuff. We figured the ration they're getting now is actually not at 12, but if I do it again on pairs, that's what I'll keep it at.
Yep.
But yeah, we buy in all of the hay that we use on the bale grazing system. We grow a little bit of hay, but I actually just leave it out. And when this wraps up, the cows will be dry, and they go right out there and they start bale grazing in March, and then that's where they calve. They'll calve May 1st this year, and so they'll bale graze the bales right where they landed, where we baled them.
So that was going to be my next question: is what months of the year or I guess what's the stop line as far as when you want to have the pile done? And I guess the question of what you're filling in that time for between when the pile's done and when the cows go back out to calving. And just one last question, touch on your winter water system.
Well, the winter water system is really easy. Like one of the things I love about this system is now I used to do a lot of things and keep the cows out, and these cows are still out on pasture, but it's like literally 700 yards from my house.
Yep.
They come right into the working facility and they walk down the alley and into a pen to get water where I got salt and their mineral. And if I ever want to treat anything or when I'm going to wean calves, they'll come in there. But it's just a simple, it's a watering bowl on the south side of the barn, nothing fancy. But I love it. It's connected to the working facility. I always wanted to do that, have the cows walking in the facility every day, and I finally got that done. What was your other questions? Which ones did you want me to?
When do you want to have that pile done by?
Well, that's a good question. I've since I started doing it, I got 2 friends that have started doing it after me, and the one guy did it right into May. I think the idea is that for me, I want those cows not on there sometime at end of March, April. They start to sink into it pretty good. If you don't mind the look of it, it's still functional. Like they can't get to the silage, so they'll be in a mud hole. The mud will start about 2 feet out, like wherever their feet stop, if you will, and then they still clean up the pile. But I don't want their udders dirty, and if we get close to calving, I've tried to stay away from it. I'd rather than be bale grazing out on this hayland that we have. Again, that being said, if you didn't calve till May 20th, you could keep them on here till May 1st if you didn't mind the mud. I try not to put them on it till November 15th. At least this year, we started about December 5th. And just strictly because I think I can keep them out on the land longer. We did some bale grazing in the fall, and next year I'm going to do some swath grazing with forages. I got another good friend that did that, and it looked like a very successful trial run. In our part of the world, it gets, it's pretty cold. We do not have Chinooks. We do not have prairie wool. So when the grass turns, it turns into plywood essentially. Some guys have really good land and have done a great job, and they're able to have some pretty high quality stockpile. Our place is pretty sandy. I've tried a lot of stuff. I've kind of come to the conclusion that when it's time to feed, it's time to feed. Otherwise, you're just going to have a poor breed up the next year because you're going to take fat off the cow's back. So that's kind of ranching in this country has been a lesson for me because I was influenced by a lot of guys from Burke Teichart to Johan Zietzman to a lot of those guys that wanted you to graze a lot, and we've tried a lot of stuff, but if whatever you're doing, you got to get the nutrients into them, and especially in this country, we know it turns cold and it stays cold. So that's
and I got my own story about how quickly that can happen. We have two different cow herds we were running this summer. Our original herd and some cows we bought this spring, and we weaned 1 week difference between the main cow herd and the new cow herd. And everyone was out on stockpile grazing. It was going great. And I headed west for agribition. So that's like mid-November. And the cow herd that was on stockpiled grazing. So the agribition, we had horrendous snow and brutal cold. And just that 1 week of having those cows on with subpar feed, it has taken an entire winter to get that cow herd caught up to where our original herd is. And the only difference was they were weaned 1 week earlier and didn't have to go through that cold, stormy stockpiled with a calf on her. So
yeah, and that's what we found too. You're walking a razor's edge there. Like it's with dry cows, you can do a lot more. It seems like
for sure.
So I guess I should say, like, we've went all the way from weaning it at 150 days to weaning at 10 months now. But next year I'm going to do a little different. I'm going to wean them in the fall, a little more traditional. My feeding system on my calves getting a little more dialed in.
Yeah.
And then I can push those cows a lot harder.
No, and listen, I came from the Gabe Brown school of or system of raising heifers and treating them like a cow, and I believe it, and I think it is everything they say is true. But what we're finding is it's just so much harder to keep that cow in condition when you can absolutely utilize the cheapest grazing of all, like our residue grazing, our stockpile grazing, shoulder season, even bale grazing. It's like it's just so easy to maintain a dry cow versus a cow with a calf on foot. So we're actually heading the same direction. And that's not to say our system's right. It's just, it's what works for our farm. And we have access to a ton of marginal feed as long as the snow doesn't screw us. And it's a lot nicer having that cow in really great shape, utilizing that residue in that stockpile than either having to supplement or worse, losing condition on those cows.
Yeah, so that's where this system has really come in for me was the high quality of the corn silage it was something I had never fed corn silage, but now I feed a lot of distillers grains in the pens to the calves and use it as a lot of supplement and fall grazing, canola meal, now corn silage. So yeah, we've really kind of changed a lot of the things that we do.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, great talk, Thomas. If you can get your wife to help you out for video for question time, we got to move on to Keegan. I knew we were going to be late. I didn't realize we were going to be this late. But thanks a lot. Great job. Stick around for questions. They're filing in. Keegan, if you are there. Oh, there you are. Perfect. So Keegan Miller, coworker slash friend of mine from LaCorrie, Alberta. So Keegan, you are on this panel because before you worked at Covers & Co, you used to have time on your hands and time to feed cows your time.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Yeah.
now we've just removed any thought or idea of that happening. So you have adapted the practice of bale grazing, and I thought just
Yeah.
super interesting perspective. You have, because you've more recently kind of made the management shift. So maybe just talk a little bit about your operation, Keegan. We'll dive into specifics here.
Yeah, so we started in 2018 as kind of the definition of a hobby farm. So we had an acreage, we raised a couple hogs, some layers, and a couple just kind of hobby farm animals, and made the decision to get into cattle when I wanted to get my daughter into 4-H. So we bought a couple bred cows, and we ended up raising them up and did 4-H, and kind of decided, well, this is something we enjoyed, and I like the cows more than I like the hogs and more than I like the broilers. So we ended up expanding. So right now we're sitting about, I think we're going to be about 25 head calving out this year, hoping to get to 50 or more in the next few years. We still live on basically just an acreage, but then we rent the surrounding, the rest of the quarter, which is a bush quarter. And then we rent, I think, a total about 320 acres of either cropland and pasture land that we move the cows throughout the year.
So maybe good to touch on here what we're feeding. Of course, what pays the bills, Keegan?
Yeah. So this year, and you'll see in the pictures coming up, but basically 3-4 years ago now, we switched to this cultivated land here. Was originally a hayfield that was kind of underproducing. So we broke it up, we put it into cover crop, and we started making silage, individual wrap silage bales out of it. So we were wrapping, about 100 to 150 bales a year, kind of off this piece and a couple others. And then this year, actually, just the way the weather worked, and we had a great crop, and then July hit with the drought and the hot temperatures, everything kind of stunted out. So we made the decision that we were going to put it up dry. So this is hauling some of this stuff home dry. So this is full season. It came in around, I'd say, about 9.5% moisture. So it was pretty dry. And the reason I kind of included this picture was the truck pulling the bales home there. The nice thing is with bale grazing that I found is it eliminates my handling at least one time of those bales. So typically was hauling home with their bale trailer there. They were getting dropped in the yard. Second tractor at home. It was then stacking, putting it in, because like I said, we're on 12.5 acres of an actual, like, the home piece. So we're pretty limited on our space. So trying to stack hay and everything like that's tight with the working system that we got built. So the nice thing here was I was able to go right out to the piece of land that I was bale grazing on, dump those bales right into the field, and then they sat there in kind of these log rolls for about 2 months before all my bales got home, and I was able to take the tractor out and actually go stack them out. So it was a nice savings that way.
So you're a rather technical person. We got some really great drone photos here.
Yeah.
Walk me through, you had exposure because your coworkers were utilizing this a lot, the bale grazing.
Yeah.
What was it you liked about the concept of bale grazing? What were you unsure about? How did you pick the number of days move? I know the answer, but I won't give it up.
Yeah.
How did you come to that conclusion of, okay, this is the system, but even within that system, it can be very flexible as far as what management looks like?
Well, to maybe back it up a little bit, like I said, we started in 2018, so we haven't been at this for very long. And I was making some notes during the other speakers, and we've tried basically every feeding system you can think of, short of silage pile wire feeding and swath grazing, are kind of the two systems that we haven't tried. So at one point, like we did individual bale rings. I was feeding every day, every second day. As the cow herd grew, I bought the bigger pipe feeders that I could put 2 or 3 bales in. Did that. We ended up upgrading our tractor. I made sure I bought a bale unroller, 3-point hitch bale unroller with it. So then I decided I was going to unroll bales. I had a winter where we used the bale processor, and I processed out on this same field. I just processed them out in lines. Did some fence line feeding in 2021 with some other feed additives and supplements because of just the drought. We had a hard time getting hay, so I was feeding straw and mixed pellets and stuff like that. And then actually at one point we even bought a old mix mill or a mixer wagon because the neighbors across the road got a fairly decent silage, and I wanted to try. We were making silage bales at that point, so I wanted to see how efficient and effective it was to go out and feed like a silage, hay, straw, grain mix all in one TMR ration. So I bought a mixer wagon, and we tried that for half a winter or whatever. And it all came down to, I was working off-farm jobs, so I was working in the oil patch. So there were sections of the winter, especially when it was cold out, we had steamers and combos, and we would be working 12, 13 hours a day. So feeding got really, really hard, just time commitment wise. And it got, stressful. My wife stepped up, and Miranda, she did a bunch of feeding, learned to run the bale processor. She was out there feeding during the day. But it was difficult, right? So we kind of made the internal decision in our family that let's just feed my job transitioned to a kind of a Monday to Friday job a little bit at one point. And we're like, let's just feed every Saturday. Like let's make it easy. Let's just go put out bales and kind of just see what happens. So we did that for about 2 years where we were kind of feeding on the weekends, and we were actually bale grazing both dry hay and silage bales together. So we would put out every Saturday, and then we would basically plus or minus it a bale or two the following week, which was good, and it worked out really well. And then I think it was last January or February, I can't remember, but Covers and Co, you guys had a webinar on the evolution of bale grazing. I think it was 2.0. And each of those 3 producers that were on that webinar had their individual style on what they did. But the one thing that kind of resonated with me that their consistency was they got rid of the hot wires, that the hot wires just, didn't work in the wintertime. And I extensively, rotationally grazed during the summer, and my cows are familiar, but they just all 3 of those panelists had bigger pods. So I remember last year I said to Miranda, I said, well, let's try it. So we went actually weighed a bale, figured it out exactly out what we needed for feed on consumption basis. And you'll see my spreadsheet. I like spreadsheets. So I figured it all out, and we fed for, I think it was 28 days we put out, and I was feeding on day 29. So for me, it was everything calculated out to exactly where they needed to be. And, you always hear of waste in bale grazing, and I look at it as maybe leftovers. I try not to use the waste term because I
Land
like
investment, we're calling it now.
yeah, exactly, right? Land investment. And so for me, that was the big thing when I was like, well, that's pretty cool if I can feed 28 days at a time. And it took us 2 hours to go out and feed that, basically, or 3 hours, whatever it was. And I was like, well, why don't we feed 3 months at a time? Why don't we feed the whole winter at a time and just see what happens? And we were fortunate enough this year, we had some extra hay. We picked up a little bit of extra rented land, so we had a bit of a stockpile. And so that's what we did. So this is the beginning of the pod. It ended up being way bigger than this. You can kind of see where the bales are tighter on the right-hand picture up to the top, and then they space out at the bottom. That's just because I haven't filled it in yet. And kind of one of the lessons learned this year was I wanted to do a trial as well to, obviously I work for Covers and Co as a territory manager here in Alberta, so I'm biased towards the quality of the feed that we can produce with diverse polycrops. But I wanted to get a really good visual of what would happen if we fed a diverse polycrop within hay and kind of gave them the free choice. So that picture on the right, well, actually both pictures, but the picture on the right, it's checkerboarded. Every second bale is an alfalfa, a fairly good high quality alfalfa bale, and then a full season bale. So the whole pod, what you see at the bottom where it's thinner, or where it's more spaced out, that's all my full season that I hauled home, and I hadn't filled it in with hay yet. And then you can kind of compare it on the right, and you can see basically right off the hop. I didn't get the drone out as soon as I wanted to, but they've pretty much eaten the in between the rows, and they've gone up and down and chewed that full season bales, and that's the ones they went for, and they basically just walked right past the alfalfa bales for me, which was a learning as well, because if I could do it again, um, I would definitely, I would almost group together my different feed qualities in the pod itself, because I found like the two biggest learnings I had was grouping my quality feeds together within the pod, and then also waiting until I have a decent snowfall and like a decent snowpack before I open and let them in. Because with it, we started feeding, well, actually they broke into it. I think it was the 25th of October. They were in it for a couple days. I kicked them out. They broke in again. I kicked them out. And then we started feeding about November 5th. So it worked out to about November 1st, a full feed. No snow on the ground at that point, and they just literally walked, and they tied into pretty much every full season bale we had, and they were gone rather quickly to the point where we were pretty concerned that our timing was going to be way off and that this was a big old mistake. But it actually turned out pretty well for us.
So where are you sitting now as far as days into the, did you go the full 3 months? And
No,
I think my next question is, I was up in your area. You guys
Yep.
have a decent amount of snow.
Yep.
I mean, the concern always is, and it was my concern for like 10 years. That's why we slowly went from 3 days to a week to 2 weeks to 3 weeks, is what happens when you get the cows have that bale leveled. There's 30% of that plant material left, and we're getting a foot of snow.
Yeah, and that's a concern, and you can see that in the left-hand picture, because there's piles of residue there that in a year like this year, we actually got pretty lucky because we had some fairly decent thaws this winter, so it kind of exposed that leftovers, and they went back. The other part about it, honestly, I think it comes down to almost uncomfortably pushing your cattle and making them work for you. Like there was times when and I'm fortunate enough, there's another picture. I can see this from my patio window. So I get to check my cows with a set of binoculars a couple times a day. And not quite that one. I wish it was that close. But the thing about it was, I would look out there and I'd be like, oh geez, there's not a lot out there. And I'd jump on the quad and take a rip out. And there was enough. And then we did have one other kind of extenuating circumstance that proved in our favor, where at where my waterer is, the cows busted a piece of fence and they got up into my horses. And my horses, I bale graze my horses as well, and I always have done that. And they had bales left on the top of the hill, and those cows had full bales standing on top of another hill in the opposite direction, and they continued to come back to this bale grazing pod and pick through the residue daily. So I kind of used it as a bit of a barometer where I could look out my other window and look at that bale on the hill and say, well, they haven't eaten that one yet, so they're obviously not starving. And I just let them go, and I let them go a long time, and they cleaned it up really well. So the other thing, like on my 3 months, my calculations were off because I also didn't calculate properly. Like I calculated based just on my female cow herd. As Thomas mentioned, we also switched we did a whole bunch of management changes this year, kind of with all the things we've done. We try to fail fast. And one of the things we've got some purebred, so we always tried to push January, February calving, and we don't have the facilities for it. So we've moved to May calving now, and we've moved to, that 10, 11 month weaning, where I want my cows to really teach those heifers, those retained heifers, how to bale graze. Like I want them to learn as a calf on what to do. So I had, 18 calves, 2 bulls, all my 27 cows, and then I think one feeder steer that we had out there. So it was a lot more animal units than I had actually originally calculated. But it worked out that we got this pod of 115 bales, got 75 full days for that whole group. So
Where was it as far as your expectations on how many days were they supposed to be there based on the
well,
math?
the problem is my supposed calculation was actually until about the 10th of March, I think, is when I calculated to. But like I said, I screwed up my calculations early on.
Right.
So I just didn't, I think my original calculation was like 33 animal units I had out there, and I actually ended up having, I think, 54. So it worked in line with what I would expect. And around here, at least we use the old adage, seven bales per cow per year for the feeding. And if you do the math on that, it's pretty much right on par with what we've got left in the season until they start kind of grazing this area. So
Well, and we always set out, hey, like you had mentioned that bale up on the hill, that hey, they hadn't touched that bale yet. They still got lots of grazing. We always try and use, even if we're grazing really good stuff, we'll put marginal stuff and even like some good straw or like 2-year-old oat straw, something like that. And always try and use that as a barometer for it's like, oh, they're really digging into the oat straw. Obviously, I mean, they've cleaned up what they're going to clean up
yeah,
and supplement accordingly. Problem with this winter is it's been so bitchin' cold here that we are burning through our hay. Fortunately, we've got lots this year, but it does make for a bit of a management. I don't want to say headache, but we've got twine off 250 straw bales that we're gonna have to do something with. So
Yeah.
not the most ideal situation. However, on most years, you know, our cows can utilize that. We'll up the grain for a few days, have them utilize the straw to the best of their ability, and then move them on.
For sure. Yeah. And actually this is you just go back 1 second.
Yeah.
So actually this is the kind of an interesting angle that I actually hadn't realized till just now, but in each of those rows there's 8 bales basically in each of those rows. They were, this one gap in the middle is a little far, but they had about I think it was 20 feet center to center. And I'm actually mapped it out with the GPS on my tractor. So I put those bales real close. And in between each of those was basically where the full season bales were. And you can see the alfalfa standing, and there's nothing to be talked about for the full season dry hay.
So I'm just gonna switch you here. Obviously, you got a story with the deer.
Yeah.
What was the strategy when you were setting out those bales as far as distance?
So Aaron Nurboss was on the webinar last year, and one of his pictures that he has, it's actually one of the screensavers on my computer, is like a perfect square, and it's just a solid manure mat. And that's the ultimate goal of what I wanted. Is I didn't want, like, I've got another picture coming up of the bale rings. Like, I didn't want to see those bale rings. I wanted to see a solid manure mat. And then the idea is I'm never going to bale graze on that piece again. I'm going to move on. And so I've got T-posts out there right now that I've left there that I'll use as my markers for next year to make sure I don't bale graze on that same spot. So I'm going to move it again. This is also different kind of land. This is a slough bottom piece that I haven't. I'm going to transition this for the soil health side, and I'm going to move it to some of my perennial land to try to boost some lower fertility spots there. But yeah, this is a challenge. This is my lovely deer population that we have. So to the left, like straight ahead and to the left in this picture is basically 120 acres of bush, and to the right is my neighbor's large barley pile and silage pile, and those deer know where every piece of feed is around this area. So this was from a couple years ago, so you can still see the old metal feeder out there on the island that it builds up with manure and waste there. So this is before we kind of got into really bale grazing. You can see a couple piles where we tried it a little bit. This is a few years ago. But one thing I found, like, I've got a livestock guardian dog and I have a collie. So I know basically anytime we have ran into any deer population, any deer issues, if I go out there, a few times a day and just take a walk through, the dogs always come with me and they scare the deer off. And it gets to the point, like, this is my view basically zoomed in a little bit, but this is my view from my deck. So I'm able to see it and, go for a walk out there, kick the deer out with the dogs, and it seems to work pretty good holding them off. Like this year, we haven't had any issue with deer whatsoever. So
What's going on here?
So this was a picture from this spring. So this was basically that first line you see there, the darkest, where the couple of cows were. That was the 28-day experiment we did last year.
Right.
So we wanted to really see, and the picture doesn't necessarily do it justice, but it's kind of neat to see. You can see a couple different rings around, but those cows, the interesting part about it too. So this quarter that we're on, like I said, we're on a 12-acre piece, and then the rest of it's all bush. So I'm fortunate enough that when that snow starts to recede, I pretty much stop feeding because there's enough stockpiled in those trees that for my small herd, they're able to go and start munching, and I kind of just feed as needed. And they came back, and there was lots left over that had got snowpacked on, and they came back to those piles and they cleaned it up well. So I'm really expecting the kind of the same thing this spring, and I'll have more pictures of it for you next year. But that piece is basically right where those cows are now, and I'm expecting, you know, once the snow starts receding, they're going to be back there, and they're going to be eating on whatever's left.
Speaking from experience, that will happen.
Yeah.
Okay, so we should dive into this. We're not going to go
Yeah.
through every number, Keegan.
No.
But let's go. I think at least for me, the interesting ones are you've got your grazing costs with bale grazing. This is all on the left-hand side. Your daily
Yep.
feeding and your weekly feeding. So
Yeah.
again, you just came from these systems. So maybe just touch a little bit on this.
Yeah, so I got the numbers here. I'll just, if I can find it, I'll pull it up. But basically those three, so the grazing cost, that's my bale grazing from this year. You've got my livestock data up there, so 54.68 animal units. The bale info, because they were different types, all that stuff. And if anybody wants to take a look at this, just send me an email. I can send it off to you. But basically I kind of equated that I fed out about 161,000 pounds of, you know, as fed hay based on the calculations I did. At a value of 6 cents, brought my total to about $9,600 to buy that in. Now, a lot of it I produced myself, but give or take, you know, that's my opportunity cost on that product. So $9,600. And then I've got, you know, 6 hours basically it took us, not including, I didn't include anything in this that would have been the same for multiple systems. So I didn't include hauling the hay to the yard. I didn't include that stuff because that's going to be the same for all of it. But I had 6 hours with my daughter out there basically putting bales out and taking twine off those 115 bales. It took us about 6 hours. We did in October. There was no frost. We weren't fighting frozen net wrap. So that's what I kind of got. And then I got about 10 hours of miscellaneous net manpower at about $55 an hour for me to just go out, check the cows, you know, top up mineral feeders, that kind of thing. So a total cost for the 75 days worked out to that, you know, basically $11,000, which on a per head per animal unit per day, basically it's about $2.68. And other than, you know, my couple feeder calves that I have in the pens and my bulls and stuff that I pulled off kind of mid-January there, they're all, you know, I don't have any other chores. My tractor doesn't start. I think I put 4 jerry cans of fuel into my tractor this year so far.
So I just want to touch on one number you see here, which is the number one question you get asked of bale grazing. You've got leftover percentage at 11%. How'd you come up with that?
So basically all I did was I figured out what they should have eaten. So if you look at that animal units at 3% and 3%, some guys would argue that's pretty high for a dry cow, and it is, but I'm on 11-month or 10-month weaning, so those were all lactating days. So those cows were eating a lot more and the calves were eating as well. So 3% body weight basically works out to 1,640 pounds per day times the 75 days. You know, they should have eaten 123,000 pounds of dry matter. Like if this had been a perfect system, that's what would have gone out. What actually went out was about 140,000 pounds. So I've got some about 15 to, you know, maybe a massage the numbers, 20,000 pounds worth of waste. Call it
Land
waste if you
investment.
want, but I call it land investment or leftovers at about 11%, or ultimately, you know, adjusted to 12 bales essentially, or at today's price about $1,000 worth of feed that was left over.
So last question, then we'll get to question period. What do you think when you were feeding in rings and the 2 bale feeders, what do you think that number is?
Oh, that's a really good question. And through just experience and education, I don't have an answer for it, because I, like most farmers, have spent a lot of years with just my head buried in the sand in terms of what my actual cost of production is. And it's only been in the last 2 years where I've kind of really started to look at, like, what is it that it's costing me to run this operation. And, you know, being able to go out and, you know, I used to think I was feeding efficiently by putting 2 bales in a ring and they have just a little of a pile left over. But when you factor in tractor starting every 2-3 days, that's when you start getting into your daily feeding and your weekly feeding costs. And it kind of skyrockets.
Okay, we're gonna get to questions. Keegan, I'm gonna give it to you, you first. So guys, if you want to unmute yourself, turn your screens on. So the first question is, and then I'm gonna turn it to you, Keegan, to answer first. Then we'll go Rylan, Thomas, Kevin. Based on your operation today, Keegan, and what you've learned about this alternative feeding system going into winter, what's the biggest or the I guess the change you're looking forward to make next year, or I don't know if change is the right word. What's the biggest learning opportunity, and how are you going to fix that?
Oh, probably the biggest learning opportunity for me is going to be just the when I let the cows into that pod, and when I kind of give them full access to it, and what I do leading up to that. I have a second pod now that I've put out, so I pulled them out of that one on the 15th. I put it was another 28-day pod, which would have been longer if the net wrap hadn't have been frozen and I hadn't have got pissed off. But for me, they cleaning that up and they're accessing that way more efficiently than they did the first pod, because it's cold. There's a snowpack around all those bales. They're literally going to each bale. They're kind of eating one or two bales. They're eating it down. They're moving on. So that would be my biggest learning would be the when to let them in, and I'd do it with the snow if I could again.
Cool. Rylan, I'll repeat the question just in case you didn't remember. Your feeding system today, what's I guess, inefficiency or something that you're looking, I guess, to push your system even further?
Yeah, I guess I am also doing bale grazing this year too. So one thing that just right off the top of my head, nothing really glares out. Like I have had pretty good luck with a lot of things, but with the bale grazing, probably do sisal twine next year. Just the net wrap absolutely sucks to take that off. It's extremely painful to do. Makes a mess. So that's one thing. But yeah, the corn grazing worked out good. The shoulder season, whatever that is, that's fine too. So noon that a little longer, but yeah, just off that. And then also on the bale grazing too, didn't do it right off the bat, but I set up a separate pod with just straw down in the slough bottom. And that way I'm moving my cows every third day. So on the third day, they do go down there and kind of pick away at the straw a little more. It's just a way to get a few more days out of it. It seems to be working pretty good, so probably do that right off the bat next year would be one thing for me. And then doing swath grazing too. We talked about that a little earlier. I got a couple hundred heifers on swath grazing, and try to make this. I don't even know what to do. It's just we've got so much snow. It's so hard packed that it just kind of is what it is. But trying to clear it off the tractor, and the tractor doesn't even sink down to it. Swaths are absolutely invisible. So that's one thing to keep in mind. I guess maybe get into that a little earlier, but not something that I can would rely on to get me through a winter, I guess.
Well, you hit on my most favorite point of all, which there is nothing more time efficient or economically feasible than bales with sisal twine bale grazed. You set the bale there and you forget about it.
Yeah,
that's amazing. You don't have to worry about ice and net wrap, which
no.
Sure, everyone that's on this webinar has fought with those two things.
Yeah. Do they store very well, like with that kind of twine on then, or?
No, absolutely fucking terrible.
Yeah.
What we do, well, I tell people this, that I'm like, it's actually a great thing because it forces you to go get the bales picked, get them moved, and get them in. I say that to you, and we've got 150 bales of sisal twine left to pick. That'll make fun for the spring. But the other thing is, once you move them, it's really hard to move them again. So you can look at that two ways. That's a negative, and now I can't move it back to the yard or whatever. Or you look at it as a positive, where it's like, have a good grazing plan and put those bales in a spot. Even if you're not going to use them this year, like we've got hundreds of bales with sisal twine, likely we're not going to get to, but windrow them in a spot where it's easy enough you can pick up underneath them, and then just go move them somewhere close to where you're actually going to bale graze them.
Yeah, I'm sure anything would be better than taking off net rot at minus 30 and it's all on.
Absolutely. Or just have it off in September.
That too, but there's so many out there that I was a little worried about the waste. So
for sure. And that was honestly a question. Well, Thomas, maybe I'll throw it over to you. Improvements on your existing system, what you're looking to try next year. And maybe Thomas, because you've been bale grazing for a long time, ask that question about the net wrap versus sisal versus plastic. And Cheryl just asked, how much extra hay do you factor in you need when transitioning from feeders to bale grazing? Curious your perspective, Thomas.
So you guys can hear me, right?
We got you.
Yeah, so it's interesting what Ryland just said, because mine's pretty much going to be the same. I put sisal twine on a bunch of bales, and we bale grazed them before we got to the pile, and that was awesome. And I had two different custom baling outfits come in, and the second guy put plastic twine on. So next year, it's definitely, I will go buy the sisal twine and be ready. Every bale we make here will have that. The second thing would be the bales. As many years as I've bale grazed, I got caught red-handed this year. Like, you know, Joe, you live close enough to me. We had this freezing, thawing cycle, and it kept going. And when I went out to take the twine off my bales, it was a train wreck. So I'm pretty much picking the twine up after they get to them. So the lesson, you know, you always learn something. I'm going to go out there in September and take all the bales off, because I had all those bales were bought. We had them trucked in by the semi, and next year when I land them there, I'm taking the twine off. I've never had such a problem with it. So that's the biggest thing I'm going to do. Another thing is I'm going to plan my lead up to the silage pile. I love the silage pile. I'm going to do it with dry cows this next year. I'm excited about that. And I'm going to swath graze perennials, as I said. So we're going to go right from grazing in mid-October, switch to swath grazing perennials, and then we'll go from there to the silage pile grazing. As far as answering the question, how much more hay? It is a tricky thing, because everybody on here will know if you bale graze pretty high quality hay, sometimes when you go out there, if it's high quality hay, it's hard to find where the bale was.
I tell people, Thomas, I'm like, if you're bale grazing high quality hay, and I get it, snow in the middle of a bale grazing pod can be tough, but I've never seen a bale ring cleaned up that good.
No, it's the first year I ever did it. I think, you know, I was 20 some years old, and I remember telling my dad I was going to do it, and he was pretty receptive, but I think he thought he was a little skeptical. And I led him out there, and we had bought some really high quality alfalfa grass hay, and it was a mild winter, and the deer didn't bother them. And man, it was amazing. I thought I had it absolutely figured out at that point. Then I used some lower quality stuff, figured out that, you know, how to force the cattle to eat it, use a little protein supplement, keep their gut going. So it's kind of a hard question to answer, but, you know, low quality hay in a bale feeder, they'll leave 150 pounds of it in there too. Like, no doubt they'll do a better job of it, but low quality hay is low quality hay. I mean, they just won't do a great job. So that's a big X factor in bale grazing, if that answers the question.
What, Thomas, maybe just to follow up on that question, are you, when you're setting out bale grazing, are you giving one type of hay, like a pot of bales that came off the same field, or are you trying to I don't know what the right term, rations, probably the right term, like different feed qualities in there, or what's the strategy?
Well, I've done a little bit of everything, but yeah, now this year there's 3 different groups of hay in there, and I did, you know, each row has all 3 types in it, and I don't think I would do that again. I think, Keegan, you said it. I think I would test the highest quality stuff. I'd put it there first. And then, because my cows are going to be bale grazing as dry cows here pretty quick, so I would put the lowest quality at the back, and then the cows would go there. And then, yeah, that's how we did it. And then we've actually traditionally had a creep pen where we put really high quality hay so the calves could get in there and get some extra. We didn't do that this year. I just got tick lazy, to be honest.
Well, the host is getting texts from the audience members saying, I haven't seen you taking twine off. I've only seen your wife out taking twine off. So she's not watching, but thanks, honey. I really do appreciate it. So Kevin, throwing this one to you, improvements. What have you learned this year that you're going to try and take into next year?
I think the biggest thing is to duplicate this year. This has been our most successful swath grazing year ever, the most we've ever done, and it's been the cheapest feeding we've ever done. So the big thing is to keep it in the rotation so that we have at least a full quarter every year. The cost savings massive, but the lifestyle that's worked for us. Both my boys work off the farm full time. My wife's going to retire next year, so we'll have a little more travel time. You can set things up to 3 to 5 days, have wires set up. You can drop wires. It frees people up when you're working full time.
Kevin, we're gonna do this one in reverse order because I told you guys I was gonna do this. I think from a dollars and cents standpoint, everyone, obviously, everyone that's on the panel tonight has a sharp pencil, and we're doing this for cost savings reasons. But for somebody like me, I'm biased to Keegan because we chat a couple times daily. We are so common that if you're under the age of 40 and in the cattle industry, that you have an off-farm job. And I honestly worry about the future of the cattle industry is how sustainable is that when they're off the farm working 9 to 5 and the holiday, the vacation time is spent fixing the disc spine or replacing hydraulic hoses. The biggest thing for me with this alternative feeding system that we've adapted is it's given me a life back in winter that doesn't surround every day behind feeding cows. And it allows me to, like Kevin mentioned, spending a little time when his wife retires. Like Melanie and I went to Guatemala for 19 days and the cows were absolutely fine without us there. And it's just such I don't know how bad the bale grazing budget would have to look before I ever consider doing anything else. And of course, swath grazing, same thing. That works in my system, but I get to dictate when I want to spend time with the cows and not the other way around. So maybe Kevin, just elaborate further on that point about the quality of life and the management side of things.
Well, I worked in oil patch for 25 years, and I rather fed cows when I was feeding at 5 in the morning or 5 at night. And you know how good things go at 5 in the morning when it's dark and 30 below. So, or come after a hard day's work, and the last thing you felt like doing was doing chores. So, being able to do it in the daylight, I work with my daughter. Most of the times, we do most of the wire stuff during the week when the boys are working. But I tell a story years ago. We went to Mexico. I had an 8-year-old son, a 9-year-old son, and a 12 and a 14-year-old daughter. And the neighbor said, "Who's feeding your cows?" And I says, "The kids." And they said, "They're not old enough to do the chores. How do they feed cows?" They says, "We had wires set out every 4 days. They moved the wire." My father-in-law looked out the window and watched as they fed my cows, and we were gone for a week. And it freed us up to go, and the cows did not suffer. And the kids, they knew how to run a hot wire from the time they were 8 years old. So that's an example of being able to get away when you're busy with kids. But yeah, just not starting the tractor, saving money is one thing, but freeing up. And like you said, you don't want to spend every day off or holiday working. Or pretty soon, if you're not married to the right woman or they got the right family, it doesn't work.
Thomas, quality of life.
Yeah, no, it's added a lot. Like, the pile grazing, I would actually say the disadvantage to it, unfortunately, to bale grazing is that you kind of have to check on it every day. It maybe takes 2 minutes. But so like last winter, we went to Arizona and hung out with everybody where they just rope steers and drink beers basically. And I just closed it in, to be honest. That was the best management decision. I just put bales in front of it and put the hot wire in front of it and let them bale graze, and the cows didn't suffer. The hay was fine. Like they do fine on the bale grazing. So, but yeah, quality of life with the whole system is way better. I mean, we ride horses all winter in an indoor right down the road, and that's a huge part of our income and something we absolutely love to do. So yeah, the cows don't take much time in the winter.
Ryland?
Yeah, with me too. It's freed up a lot of time. There's a lot of head here just for one guy to look after too. I do have part-time guys come once in a while, but it's freed up time so I can spend a little more time doing paperwork, getting zeroed in on a few other things, and like I said, got lots of other stuff to do. So it does get a little depressing feeding cows for 4 or 5 hours every single day and spending all that money and fixing stuff in -30 weather was my biggest thing too. So yeah, it's definitely improved that by miles. So it's quite a bit nicer, and I don't think I'd ever go back. So
no, I tell people, I'm like, I just don't know how bad the budget would have to look for me to actually go back to that system. And it took me 20 years to realize if I'm gonna buy and run old equipment, it's not a matter of if it breaks down, it's when it breaks down.
Yeah,
And
and the worst weather.
it's always breaking down on
Yeah.
30. And if you got to feed cows the next day, you're fixing that thing today.
Yeah.
No matter what you have going on.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just didn't get into this to run equipment either. So would go farm if I wanted to do that.
Same. Keegan, quality of life.
Well, personally for me, like the time savings. You've got a good saying that I often think about is it's changed the perspective you have when you're out with your cattle. So you're going out there with a purpose now. You know, when I was going out every couple of days feeding cows or whatever, it often got into I was trying to get that job done. I wasn't paying attention to the health of the cow herd necessarily with a focus. I was watching to make sure where I was putting those bales and feeding or whatever. So now when I go out, it's a purpose. I can pick up on things better. I just overall my interaction with my cattle is better. But like for myself, I've been in Red Deer for the last 10 days now with my newborns here in the ICU, and I have zero stress about what's going on at home because I know they've got enough bales they can last. I've got a neighbor that's going and checking every few days. But if I had to try to bring in somebody on a small operation and explain to them how we feed and where everything is and what tractor to use, and that would just be a stress that I would not want to be dealing with. So in my personal life, being able to be on the road and then, deal with family crises like kind of we're in now, zero stress related to the operation at home because I know we've set it up so that it can be self-sustaining.
Well, and just to build on that point, obviously Keegan, you and I work together, but there was no option for us or for our farm and building a business. I basically, for the last 5 years, have spent November to April on the road. So, like I said, I talk about the budget. I don't know how bad it would have to be before I switched back. It wouldn't have been possible for us to do what we've done from a Covers and Co standpoint and have 400 head of cows that, we have to start a tractor every day. So yeah, Melanie and I went through Christmas with the family, 19 days in Guatemala, and we did 3 days at Ag Days, and I literally didn't see a cow the entire time. Fortunately, we had people at home that were supplementing and feeding, but it's just how can you beat a system and a profitability standpoint, be able to scale the amount of livestock to that with that little of time commitment. It just fits our lives, and there's going to be no going back for us. Thomas, we got a few questions. I'm just going to hammer these off specifically to you on the piles itself. I think there's 3, so I'll read them off to you. Do you need to cut the plastic on the silage pile every day and clear snow in front of the face? So that's 1. How do you decide where to put the piles? And I'm assuming you move them every year, but your perspective on that. And does it matter which direction you point it? I'm assuming they're meaning, do you face the open side of the pile south so you can get some melting, or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's the opposite you want to do to keep the sun off of it.
So the first question, the first 2 years were great. I cut the silage plastic off once a week. So I actually measured it out. The first year I was pretty dialed into how far I was moving it. So it was 8 inches a day times 7. I'd cut that much plastic off. And then that was actually one of my gauges to how far, did I hit the 7-day goal? Last year that worked out. I got a lot more leisure about it. It just was working out, you know how that stuff goes. This year with the freeze thaw thing, all of a sudden we had an inch of ice on top of the entire pile. So now I just cut it about every 2-3 days. I just cut it off in strips and burn it. It's really no big deal. You just Zippo knife, and as I'm hammering the cliff off with the butt end of the axe, I just run the knife down the whole thing and cut 70 feet off, and it'll be whatever it is, 24 inches, 20 inches. As far as moving the piles, I've moved them every year. It is a real, looks like a mess when you're done. I mean, it's all manure, right? So we just leave those piles, and it's just, there is a ton of organic matter and nutrients there, and we've just let them grow in. The first one from 3 years ago is really just a bunch of weeds now, but then all around the pile where they tend to stay, it's like bale grazing. Like, it just comes up. It's unbelievable. It's the best grass we got on the place. As far as, and then where we put the piles, we have a lot of bush around here, so I utilize that. I've had it tucked right in a bush with bush on all sides of it, which was awesome. This year I have bush to the north and to the west of it. I generally face the pile to the south. Next year I'm going to put it on the south side of the bush, so I'm actually going to have it open to the east. So the cows are just always getting away from that northwest wind, or wind coming from the northwest, so we get to utilize a lot of bush. If it was out in the middle of in the open, the one I did the second year was pretty open. We pointed the pile northwest, if you will, and then the south end was open. All of them work good. You can do it out in the middle of nowhere. And then, so I guess that's the direction of the pile too. I mean, I wouldn't open it on the north side anyways.
So, well, Cheryl, you threw your hat in the ring. You're going to get the jacket. So, Cheryl, if you can put in your name and I guess email address, and we'll send you the jacket. So, just to follow up on that, Thomas, would you consider throwing seeds on the trampled area for the pile to try and, I'm assuming, encourage growth of new plant species the following year?
Sorry, would I encourage throwing seeds where the pile was?
Exactly. Or in front, I assume, where the cows are grazing, so they trample it in.
For me, probably not. There's a lot of seeds in that seed bank. Like, something's coming up. You definitely could if you wanted to. It's probably not something I'm going to do. I thought you meant put seeds on top. I've definitely toyed with the idea of not covering it and covering it in barley or something, so you grew something on top. Our goal here is, I would love the pile to be 100% edible, like no plastic, no twine. When like the whole thing is edible, that as your wire moves back, like it's just all gone. That's what we're trying to get to.
Yeah.
But I never got away from the plastic, but yeah.
What do you think the plastic saves on the pile, like as far as wastage?
You know what? I read the studies and I can't get away from the plastic. I seen a couple piles that guys don't cover, and I think there's too much waste, especially with a silage, a grazing pile. It's only 8 feet high. You see lots of feedlots don't cover them, but the pile's like 30 feet high. The amount of surface that I have to feed underneath it is a lot more than what most people would have. Nobody would build a pile like this unless they were going to graze it. So we've always covered it. And I won't get away from that at this point in time. Just like I said, unless I can figure out some sort of edible way to cover it.
Okay, I got a final question, you guys. Cheryl, you're from Quebec. Geez, the postage is killing us on these webinars. But thanks for listening. Honestly, everyone, appreciate it. Thanks for all the questions. I'm gonna ask the final question, which is the same for every webinar. So maybe we'll go, Keegan, we'll give you last word. We'll go Ryland, Thomas, Kevin, and then you, Keegan. So the best advice you can give somebody that's just starting out. So maybe somebody's just bought a herd of cows. They're interested. Maybe they've got an old man or a family that has a very specific way on how they think cows should be wintered. But what's the best advice you'd give a young producer that's just starting out, wants to reduce cost?
Yeah, get your pencil out and just look through things, dig into podcasts, look at different studies, look into things, and then steel man them from the other way too. And just these things do work. There is a reason for it, but there is, it's, in my opinion, best to clean up your expenses and shoot for the high part in cattle, because it does seem to be a 10-year cycle. So, but it's, like I said, just do as much numbers as you can, just read as much as you can, and just look into things, I guess, and just look out for niches too. And that would be my advice, I guess. Not that I'm only 32, I guess, but that would be my advice. So.
Oh, you're the right person to ask then, because you've gone through this recently. Yeah,
well, I guess my dad was never on like, I started myself, I guess, so don't have any advice that way. But it is good. That's when my profitability really made a switch, is when I started shooting towards that. So that would be my key point.
Cool. Thomas, advice to somebody that's just starting out.
So a couple things. I'll try to be quick. Like as far as I would say buy cattle. Reduce the amount of overheads. Don't go buy a big 4-door dually and a 30-foot aluminum and a $120,000 tractor and 30 cows. It doesn't work. Try to feed your cows with as least amount of fuel as possible. You can do a lot of things. As far as buying the cows, follow the sell by guys, listen to Burke Tykart, listen to these economic experts. You can buy a good cow wrong, and that's what most people don't understand when they get into cattle business. They tend to get in when everybody's excited and the cows are worth $4,500, and then 5 years later they're worth $2,000, and they're telling you that there's no money in cows. So it's like buying any commodity, any stock. You got to buy it right. And yeah, that's probably the advice I would give them.
That's damn good advice. Kevin?
Mentor somebody that you think's doing the way you would like to do things. Like if you're a neighbor or somebody around the country, you can drive around. There's more information now than there ever has, like these guys have said. Don't take advice from people who are doing things if the way you want to do things are a new way. Don't talk. I always believe you learn from the old guys, and I'm not saying you don't, but the worst thing in agriculture business is we've always done it that way. I know it's an old saying, but it's amazing how many people around follow those same words. Can't change because that's how dad or grandpa did it. Follow somebody's path that is the way you're thinking.
Keegan, best advice to somebody just starting out.
Well, each of the other three kind of stole things that I was going to say there going last here, but biggest thing I like for myself, it's just try it. Like there's tons of podcasts, like Ryland said. There's the old timers at the coffee shop that might have a different way of doing things or a unique way or whatever. Just if you think it'll work in your system, and if you think you might see some benefit in your operation, just try it. Like bale grazing for myself, if you had 500 head and you were feeding traditionally, I'm sure you probably got a piece in the corner that you could separate off 30 head and try it. Like just to try it. Like don't go in big where it's going to put your operation at a risk if it fails. But we gotta be making mistakes and learning every year and trying all these new things. Like I've got a page of notes here of things that I want to take home and try that these guys have mentioned throughout the webinar here. So
Well, and everyone kind of touched on this point. I'll give my final thoughts. It's like nothing we do on our farm, and that includes this business that we run. These are not original ideas. These come from producers that have had the either the want to change or the idea that have implemented. They've tweaked it. They've improved it. They've done all the learning that you need, and are most cases, just like this webinar, willing to give that information up absolutely free. So it's like you don't need to reinvent the wheel. What you need to do is figure out what you have as far as resources and figure out how you can create a system that is the lowest cost production that you can. And I think Thomas touched on a really good point, especially where we're currently sitting in the cattle industry, is like, do not run out and buy a $200,000 tractor if you've got 40 cows. Do not run out and spend $100,000 on a truck and trailer. Your investments, maybe this is a strong opinion and not super popular, but try and avoid taking debt for something that's going to depreciate. Took me a long goddamn time to learn that. Sure, if you got the cash kicking around and you absolutely need that piece of equipment, do it. But innovation comes from necessity. And if you don't have that piece of equipment, chances are you're going to figure out a more efficient way how to do that without it. So if you're borrowing money, take it out on something that's not going to depreciate through the nose. Land, cattle, feed, great investments. Something that's going to depreciate, break down, cost fuel, and charge you interest. That is a recipe for not that much profitability in the cattle industry. Really, it's great that we're getting $2,500 for a 500-pound calf, but what we need to do is be able to make money. Calves are $1,200 to $1,300, and that's really, really tough to do if we're spending money on iron. So appreciate it, you guys. We are a little bit over time, but thanks everyone for staying on. Thank you, panelists. That was, as expected, a fantastic webinar. Have a great night, and we'll see you guys back in 2 weeks. Cheers, guys.